advocacy and community service. The reason that is so has been with the club's origin that date back to the Civil War. For the past 143 years, the Union League Club of Chicago has upheld those values, promoting civic engagement, good government, service to others. Our motto is community and country, and we pursue this mission through our Public Affairs Committee and 3 philanthropic foundation, Boys and Girls Club, Lumen Arts Cultural Foundation, and the Engineers Foundation. So this place is much more than just a beautiful club with lovely guest rooms, wonderful cuisine, and amenities. It's an institution that emphasizes the values that are at the heart of our democratic republic. I have the great privilege of introducing State's Attorney Kim Foxx. We're honored to have State's Attorney Kim Foxx to join us this morning to give an address on the state of the Cook County's State's Attorney's Office and the criminal justice system as we move out of this long pandemic. Kimberly M. Foxx is the first African-American woman to lead the Cook County State's Attorney Office, the country's second largest prosecutor's office. Her vision is to build the most just, equitable, and transparent prosecutor's office in the country by working proactively to make all communities safe while investing in policies to address the underlying drivers of contact with the criminal justice system. State's Attorney Foxx has brought substantial progress in the priority areas including wrongful convictions, bond reform, transparency, and gun violence. Born and raised in Cabrini Green on Chicago's near north side, she is a graduate of Southern Illinois University, where she earned her BA in political science and her JD from the School of Law. It's with great pleasure to introduce State's Attorney Kim Foxx.
Thank you so much, Bob, and it is such a true pleasure to be here with you back at the Union League Club once again. I believe it's been more than 2 years since I've had the opportunity to be here in person, so much so that I wrapped my arms around the checkman at the door because it's just so good to have some semblance of normalcy back here at the Union League Club. I want to thank you and your committee for hosting me here today. I did not arrive here alone. I want to acknowledge my staff who was with me, First Assistant Risa Lanier, Chief of Staff and Policy Allison Miller, and our Chief Data Officer Matthew Saney joined me here today. I also see some members of our office from our Juvenile Justice Bureau as well who've joined with us, and I thank them for coming. I want to thank those of you who are listening online who do not have the pleasure to be in our beautiful place of hospitality today. And I want to once again acknowledge and thank the staff of the Cook County State's Attorney's Office who are not here with us today, but who are doing what they have done so tirelessly throughout this pandemic, working very hard to bring safety and justice to our communities. As Bob mentioned, the Cook County State's Attorney's Office is the second largest prosecutor's office in the country. We have over 750 attorneys who work with us and more than 1,200 employees. These are assistant state's attorneys who are dedicated public servants who work tirelessly around the clock, even during a pandemic, to ensure justice for all of those who live in Cook County. I want to also thank our data team as they work quietly behind the scenes to ensure that we can be the most transparent and data-driven office in the country. I am honored to have the opportunity to update you about the state of my office. We are coming up next week on 2 years since the COVID-19 pandemic seized our country, our nation, and our court system. The work that our office has been doing during the course of this pandemic has been nothing short. It goes without saying that the pandemic has devastated our communities in the loss of life, those who have lost their jobs, the shutdown of much-needed social services, the collective trauma of being forced inside of our homes particularly when news was scarce and data contradictory. I mention this, and I start there, about this once-in-a-lifetime event that we find ourselves still trying to find our way out. And as we talk about the state of our office, because the men and women of our office who continue to do this work, we're actually dealing with these issues firsthand. Since the beginning of this pandemic, our office has lost several members of our staff. Our staff members have lost members of their families, parents, children, spouses. Since the beginning of this pandemic, our staff have had to deal with parenting at home while also doing their work. They became lawyers and administrators and investigators, as well as teachers and counselors. I say this as someone who has had the tremendous privilege of leading this office, but also parenting 4 teenage girls at home while they were remote learning. And boy, oh boy, am I glad that everybody back at school. But for the men and women of my office who are not privileged enough to have the role that I am, they were balancing all of these things: loss, exhaustion, and the shutdown or slowdown of one of the largest criminal justice institutions in the world. And they showed up every day on behalf of the people of Cook County. And so I just wanted to take a moment to level set here, that we are in extraordinary times, and this state of the office comes in this extraordinary moment. But we could not be here without the dedication of all of our staff members from top to bottom who've continued to serve in these truly remarkable times. Again, when you think about the scope of our justice system here in Cook County, it is something to behold, how we've continued to be able to provide that justice, not just from the state's attorney's office, the public defender's office, the defense bar, as well as the judiciary, who has kept the trains on the track. In the fall, we announced with the rest of the county government our mandate for COVID-19 vaccines. And again, as people were struggling through this virus, I'm very proud to say that our office is currently 100% in compliance with the COVID-19 mandate. Again, I think it speaks to the commitment and dedication and the willingness to do whatever it takes to be able to stand on the front line for all. It goes without saying that the last 2 years have been some of the most painful and devastating in terms of violence in our communities. Despite the resiliency that my office has shown during COVID-19, we cannot forget what was happening in the world. As I mentioned earlier, COVID-19 affected social services, employment, and places of refuge, like after-school programs, boys and girls programs, churches. We don't often talk enough about the link between COVID-19 and violence. And what we know is that this will be something that will be studied and should be studied for years. Because the reality is, here in Chicago and in Cook County, violent crime saw a sharp rise since the onset of COVID-19. And it is important, as we address what's happening here in Cook County, that we also take stock of where we are as a country. Violence, particularly gun violence, is up around the country. It is up in places large and small. It is up in rural and urban areas. Homicides are up in places like New York and Los Angeles and Albuquerque, New Mexico. Shootings are up here in Chicago and across the country. When we think about last year's homicide rate in the city of Chicago alone, 800 murders, is absolutely unacceptable. If you know anything about me, this is the part of the program when I talk about that I grew up in Cabrini, because it becomes relevant in our conversations about violence and what works to stem it. I grew up in Cabrini in the 70s and 80s, and had families there in the early 90s when our homicide rates were 900, 1,000. I know what it's like to seek shelter in bathtubs when gun violence wreaks out. This is deeply personal to me. And so as we talk about these numbers, these are people, these are families, these are communities that have been devastated by this. And this is why we must put the full force of our office to work to ensure that our communities are safe. It's also why we have had the benefit over the course of the last 30 years to look at what we've done in the times when violence was high before and to not make the mistakes of the past. Ladies and gentlemen, in the 80s and 90s, when we were trying to wrap our arms around the violence in our communities, not just here in Chicago, but nationally, we saw the institution of some horrific criminal justice policies that devastated and have generational impacts on the very communities that are continuing to see violence today. It is why that even in this place of fear that is real, we cannot operate as we have in the past and be rooted by emotion and not by data and research and evidence that tells us what works and what doesn't work. So I'll tell you what we've been doing in furtherance of that. I want to be abundantly clear. The Cook County State's Attorney's Office is doing their part in addressing violence in our community. As a result of our resilient staff and with the support of our partners, we were concerned that this shutdown of the courts for such a long period of time would lead to an influx of cases in our trials, especially with the lifting of the Speedy Trial Act, which ensures that a defendant has a right to go to trial within a specified period of time. We were concerned that after 18 months of that act being suspended, that there would be a crush on our system, and we prepared. We prepared for months to be able to meet the challenge. And in fact, in 2021, not only did we meet the challenge, we exceeded it. We began to see the resolution of cases to match the pre-pandemic level. And this in a court system that has no match here in the United States. We continue to work with our partners in law enforcement as they brought us cases to approve for felonies. And what we have found is that we've approved 86% of the adult felony charges that were presented to us by police. I feel compelled to repeat that because I have a little time longer than the sound bites that might be used. 86% of the felonies that were presented to our office for review were approved. And of all of the cases that were approved during this time period, we had a 75% conviction rate. A 75% conviction rate. I do think it is notable, however, that the conviction rate and our approval rate are just one aspect of how you measure the work within our office. But it is incredibly important to know that not only are we bringing charges, but we are finding success in the charges that we are bringing. And that is because we are doing our due diligence in only bringing forth charges where the facts, the evidence, and the law supports it. Another point of privilege. In our high anxiety of what's happening in our communities and the availability of social media and things that we see on television, and perhaps far too many episodes of Law & Order or CSI, there's been a perception of how the justice system works. And our office has an obligation as lawyers, an oath that we took, that requires us to only bring charges when the evidence, the facts, and the law supports it. And what, again, we have found by doing that, we have found success in not only having an arrest, and a charge, but a conviction. As I said, gun violence has continued to be a scourge on Cook County in rates that, though other parts of our country are seeing it, we still remain an outlier with other major cities as we deal with gun violence. The Cook County State's Attorney's Office approved 7,110 gun cases in 2021, and we secured convictions on 5,145 cases in 2021. And the core of our work is to prosecute these criminal cases. And the numbers show we're doing that work even in the midst of this pandemic and this period of turmoil in workforce, which some of us have collectively called the Great Resignation. We're prosecuting with integrity, and we're also doing our part to build trust in the criminal justice system. Building trust is violence prevention. Now, a lot of people ask me, we talk a lot about building trust, and there is this kind of inherent acceptance that we recognize that some of our communities that are besieged by violence have little faith in the criminal justice system. They struggle in the relationship with policing. We have to address that. We have to talk about that with the same ferocity as we talk about existing laws. The people in the neighborhoods who need us most oftentimes trust us the least. And that is not by sheer folklore. We've seen it. We've seen it in the wrongful convictions obtained by a corrupt police officer, Sergeant Watts, who went into the Ida B. Wells housing projects and shook down people whom he believed would not be believed by the justice system. To date, over 150 plus convictions obtained by Sergeant Watts has been vacated. We talk about that in as much as we talk about the gun convictions that we have. Because for the people who have been impacted by these corrupt acts, we need them to work with us. We need them, when they see something, to say something, to pick up the phone, to bear witness, to come into the courthouse and raise their right hand and tell the truth. And the only way that they will be willing to do that is if we prove ourselves to be trustworthy partners in this endeavor, such that when we get it wrong, we acknowledge it, we fix it, and we do everything within our power to not do it again. Building trust is a crime prevention method, and it is one that in our conversations, even in the midst of fear, we must put at the top. We have formalized our commitment to do this work, to fixing the inequities in our system through a commitment to both accountability and justice reform. I want to disabuse us of the notion that you cannot do both. If we're going to meaningfully address the violence in our communities, we must hold those who harm our communities to account, and we must also work to reform those parts of our systems that have failed far too many of us. And it also means that we have to take a trauma-informed and victim-centered approach to do that. And here in the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, we put victims first. In 2021, the Felony Review Unit approved 438 sex crimes with an approval rate of 89%. In that same year, Assistant State's Attorneys prosecuted 355 sex cases with an 86% conviction rate. In addition, as we look at a victim-centered and victim-informed approach, we double down on our efforts in the issuance of what we call U visas. Those are visas that are provided to those who are undocumented within our community, who have helped us in the prosecution of crimes, whether as victims or witnesses. What we recognize that for some, it doesn't matter of your immigration status. if you see someone harming your neighbor, you ought not be more afraid of the criminal justice system and deportation than harm coming to your communities. And thus, last year, we issued 230 certifications, providing recipients with the opportunities to receive or pursue a U visa, which allows them to have permanent residency here in the United States. In addition, as I said before, I believe transparency should be the hallmark of any governmental agency. I oftentimes get incredibly frustrated when I hear narratives about what's happening in our communities, our court systems, because it's often led by anecdote. The Cook County State's Attorney's Office has led the country in our transparency efforts. And I want to just give you an opportunity to know what gems you have right at your fingertips to be able to interrogate, to question, to push back on misinformation that you may have heard. Cook County State's Attorney's Office was the first prosecutor's office in the country to provide an open data portal on our website that allows anybody, constituent, academic, researcher, law enforcement, to look at every single piece of felony case level data that has come from our office going all the way back to 2011. What we also realize is that researchers, academics, constituents sometimes don't have the ability to just go in and look. And so in 2021, we decided to bring the information to our partners. And we began sending monthly detailed county and district level data reports to our federal, state, county, and city elected officials so that they can see in a more granular level what's happening in your House district, your Senate district, your aldermanic ward, so that we can be able to address the issues that are happening in our communities with the specificity that is required for the community. Currently, we are sending our monthly data reports to over 250 elected officials. In addition to our data reports, we have dispatched members of our office via in-person or Zoom, or Teams, to meet with community members, to walk them through the data, to answer the tough questions, so that we are fully informed about what we are doing and reacting appropriately. But before I wrap up, I certainly want to take your questions, I want to switch gears for a moment. We often talk about the criminal work, the prosecution that we do, that is at the forefront of what we do in our office. But my office also has the Civil Actions Bureau that represents Cook County government and represents the public interest of the county's 5.3 million residents. The Civil Actions Bureau is the lawyer for Cook County government, and we continue to be a revenue generator and a revenue saver for the county. For example, the real estate tax litigation section saved nearly $180 million in tax dollars for the various taxing districts in Cook County against commercial property challenges to the assessments in circuit court. This revenue was saved through the Cook County State's Attorney's Office handling of over 10,000 individual cases on behalf of Cook County Treasurer Maria Pappas. The municipal litigation section won a $266 million award for Cook County's Department of Revenue against Sam's Club from their unpaid tobacco taxes over the period of 2009 to 2016. Our Child Support Services Division last year litigated nearly 8,000 cases to set appropriate child support awards for the children here in Cook County. In fact, the Child Support Assistant State's Attorneys won over $13.7 million in current child and medical support payments, as well as the collection of past child support debts to help ensure that children have the financial support that they need. And just last week, Attorney General Kwame Raoul announced his final approval of the historic national $26 billion opioid settlement agreement with the nation's pharmaceutical companies, in which our office had worked tirelessly for years to bring to resolution. And we are grateful to finally have done so. We are an office, as I started this conversation, that is built with dedicated public servants, whether fighting for public safety or ensuring taxpayers are getting their just reward. They show up every day on behalf of the people of Cook County. Looking forward, the Cook County State's Attorney's Office in 2022 will focus on hiring and retention. I alluded to this earlier. Doing this work under these circumstances at this time is incredibly challenging. But much like many of our partners in law enforcement, we have seen a rise in resignations of people taking the opportunity to find other things to do. This is often thankless work, and we certainly don't pay them what they deserve. But we need talented, hardworking assistants to come work with us, and our #1 priority is on hiring and retention. In addition, we're going to continue to bolster our community outreach, which is an ongoing priority for us. Again, establishing relationships of trust and accountability means that we have to meet people where they are. And in 2022, we will do what we have done since the beginning of this administration, which is administering justice in a fair and equitable way in the effort to make a better, healthier, and safer Cook County by focusing our resources on pursuing violent crime while working collaboratively with enforcement partners at the local, state, and federal levels. The challenge remains high. I am so honored and grateful for the commitment of the members of the Cook County State's Attorney's Office who has not yet met a challenge that they could not defeat. And they stand on the front lines on behalf of all of you to continue to uphold that here in 2022. Thank you so much.
That was just wonderful. Thank you. We have a few questions from the audience. Here's the first one.
Ready.
What has been your office's experience so far with resentencing initiatives that went into effect on January 1, 2022, and what future developments do you anticipate?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Last year, the General Assembly passed and Governor Pritzker signed an initiative that allows for prosecutors throughout the state of Illinois to revisit previous sentences that had been administered prior. And we were proud to help push this legislation in the recognition, again, of a past period in our criminal justice history in which we would see sentences that would no longer be given out today. Our office has been working tirelessly for the last several weeks to put together a criteria for evaluating and reviewing such sentences, and I can forecast that in the very near future we will start to see the filing of motions asking for folks to be resentenced. This is a process, though new, that we have been anticipating for months, and you will see a more robust, or see a robust program of sentencing review coming from our office.
Since Illinois has no control over gun sales in Indiana or Wisconsin, how can there be effective reduction in illegal guns distributed in Cook County?
Yeah, I mean, listen, make no mistake, we have a gun problem here in Cook County. We have a gun problem here in Cook County. And we all know, you all know, that such sales are not permitted here. We know that the guns are coming not just from Indiana or Wisconsin, but further down from the south and to the east. We should also point out that as we talk about these gun sales, The guns that we are seeing on our streets, we saw at the start of the pandemic the highest number of gun sales in American history. American history. Legal gun sales have continued to outpace hands that are available to hold them. What we know is that the pandemic, and again, researchers will examine this for years to come, and the fear and anxiety, we saw a driven increase in gun sales. And I oftentimes don't make a distinction between legal gun sales and illegal gun sales. There are far too many guns on our streets. And so we are in support of the efforts that the city and other of our stakeholders have had in pushing for the federal government to have increased oversight of these gun sales that are happening across borders. We continue to work with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms in helping that they utilize the might that they have to go after gun dealers who we know and have identified as being places where these guns are coming from. But we need a thoughtful, strategic, and fulsome federal program to deal with gun sales in this country. Full stop. Because what we are doing is responding to gun violence. I tell people all the time, Cook County State's Attorney's Office is not a first responder. We're last responders. We show up after the chalk outline's already been drawn. We recover guns after the shells have been spent. What we need is a robust crime prevention strategy that deals with the illegal sales of firearms or illegal distribution of firearms that come across state lines. That is not something that we have the ability to do in the State's Attorney's Office, but we do call on those who do have that ability to do their jobs.
This is the last question I have from the audience. What support does the State's Attorney's Office provide for restorative justice programs? And do you find that these programs reduce recidivism?
So for those of you who aren't aware, restorative justice is the premise that the person who has caused harm and the person who has been harmed all serve a purpose of being made whole. That we want the person who has caused the harm to be able to atone for what it is that they have done, but we know that crime is so very local and that they'll be back in the very same community that the person that they harmed lived in. And that the community that houses them both requires for them both to be made whole. And so we see restorative justice, largely we've seen it in the juvenile justice space. The juvenile justice space here in Cook County has been a pioneer of restorative justice programs for decades. Chief Judge Evans, in the course of the last several years, has opened a number of restorative justice courts to deal with adults in the criminal legal system that allows for example, in Lawndale, for community members within Lawndale to be able to deal with defendants who have been accused of crimes and to work with them to say what the appropriate accountability looks like. And we've seen success in the restorative justice program or the restorative justice courts, so much so that we saw recidivism levels decrease and an increase of these courts across the city. So there are now 3 restorative justice courts across Chicago. I believe Chief Judge Evans is looking to expand that. But we have to be creative and thoughtful about how we address crime in our communities. And I think the way that juvenile courts have led in this effort is a lesson that we can take stock in. The reality is, you didn't ask this part, it's probably when I should have stopped talking, but we talk a lot about incarceration. And I think there's been this thing that we've sold people, that incarceration is going to make us safer. Let me say unequivocally, we have to hold people accountable for the harms that they commit. We have to hold people accountable. But we also have to recognize what are the practices that we are doing aimed at accountability that might actually be causing additional harm. We need to be able to understand and recognize that we had some of the highest incarceration rates in the 80s and 90s, where we saw incarceration rates explode. At the same time, we saw homicide rates of 800 and 900 in this city. If incarceration alone worked in keeping our communities safe, we'd be one of the safest nations in the country. The reality is, the United States only represents 5% of the world's population, and yet 25% of those incarcerated throughout the world are here in the United States. The reality is that 90% of the people who go to prison return home. It's only a small sliver of folks who are sentenced to life without parole. Only a small sliver. And so I often hear the question about the repeat offender. So I'm going to just take it on. Somebody might have wrote it and didn't want to pass it up. Let's talk about the repeat offender, shall we? We have a criminal justice system that in Illinois, back in 2015 numbers, we would see what we would call a recidivism rate of somewhere around 57%, where someone coming out of the Illinois Department of Corrections would wind up back in the criminal justice system 3 years later. 57%. More than half of the people who come out would find themselves back. Tell me what other business model can you have a failure rate of 57%, and the next time we have an issue, someone says double and triple down on that? That's the system we have. What do we need to do? I'm asking that question for myself. What do we need to do? One, we need to recognize that people who are coming out of the criminal legal system, coming out of our prisons, there are things that we know drive down violence. I'm a last responder. The things that we know drive down violence: healthy, safe, thriving communities. People who have the ability to get a job are less likely to take things from others. They have a lot more to lose. People who have to provide for their families need the ability to have adequate housing. They need the ability to be able to provide. Trauma. I said that we were a trauma-informed office. I think we don't talk nearly enough about what trauma looks like. And maybe coming out of COVID-19 and this collective trauma that we've exhibited or experienced, and we're talking more about mental health. I've got young people. If you ask them, how many of them have seen someone who's been murdered or shot or known someone who's been murdered? Most of them will raise their hands. I had a high school classmate get murdered in 1989, and I remember it to this day. And yet, for so many of our young people who are living in these neighborhoods sieged by violence, don't have access to trauma-informed care. School social workers. People who come out of prison. I don't know what TV shows you've seen. I've never seen a TV show that has made prison seem fun. They're traumatized. They need mental health services. This isn't altruistic. This isn't philanthropic. This is basic violence prevention. Meeting the needs of communities that have been impacted by crime and violence, and not wholly putting our eggs in the incarceration basket is what we need to do. Because I don't want to see 30 years from now, when we look back at this period in our history, that we've repeated the same things that we've done over and over again and gotten the same result because we are afraid and we devastate communities in our wake. We can't afford it. Last thing. When I grew up in Cabrini, the school that we went to was one of the most underperforming schools in the city. that same school is now Skinner North. Same building, same building. When I lived on Division in Halsted, we didn't have a grocery store. There's an iFly indoor skydiving place there now. The areas where we're seeing violence in our communities, I'm not bemoaning people who want to fake jump out of airplanes, just to be clear. We celebrated the first Whole Foods in Inglewood 5 years ago. We talked about the fact that the city is now acquiring an Aldi in Lawndale because it's the only grocery store that they had. You don't see the violence over in the Near North Side like you saw it when I was there, when we didn't have grocery stores, when we didn't have good schools. But you're seeing it in the 11th District, where they don't have a grocery store, where they don't have libraries, where the unemployment rate is higher than anywhere else in the city. If we are serious about addressing violent crime in this city, we have to stop doing the things that have not made us safer and doing the hard work of accountability and restoration, not as charity, but because we're all better for it. If you'd have asked my mother if she would have thought that her daughter would be the first black woman state's attorney living at 624 West Division, she would not have believed you. Let me be the embodiment of what we're losing when you see someone dying in Roseland, when you see someone dying in Little Village, when you feel like those communities are so far away. We're losing the cure for COVID, for cancer, an incredible teacher, coach. That's what's at stake when we take a half-hearted attempt at criminal justice reform in Cook County.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
Is the state's attorney's office getting the support and assistance that it needs from the mayor's office, from Chicago Police Department, to effectively prosecute cases? And if not, what would be the most important aspects or things that would be needed that you're not getting?
Listen, we have worked with the Chicago Police Department. It is one of the things that I will be honest is incredibly frustrating, the narrative about personalities as opposed to about the work. I talked about the men and women of this office who work 24 hours to ensure that our communities are safe. They do that with law enforcement. There's not a single case, criminal case, that comes into our office that does not have a law enforcement partner on it. We need them to be successful. Our success is intricately tied to their success. And every day, these people from our office and Chicago Police Department do the work, head down, do the work, even with all the noise and the headlines and the quipping about their bosses. They do the work. For some people, I'm their 5th state's attorney that they're on. They could care less about the political posturing that sometimes happens as a part of this job. They care about keeping our communities safe. So I just want to disabuse the notion that we don't work well with our partners. We do. Now, do we disagree? Absolutely. We absolutely find ourselves in disagreement, again, for the philosophical debate that I just started a little bit ago. But we're on the same mission. I also have the dual distinction of being an elected official and a lawyer. And not just any lawyer, I'm a prosecutor. I carry a separate oath. That means sometimes I can't respond to things in the media to the speed that others might want me to. It means that I can't say things however much I want to, when I want to. And I think what I would ask for those who may not have the benefit of the information that we have, to adhere to the same standards. But what I am proud of is that we have continued to work through some of the challenges that come when we are in really desperate times, and to be on the same accord. And so what we need from our partners is what we want to be for them. Their full commitment to doing everything that is possible to put all hands on deck to address the violence in our communities. And I am confident that we share that with the mayor, the police superintendent, as well as all of the other mayors and police chiefs throughout Cook County.
Honored guest, and thank you very much. I am going to turn this over to Christina. There she is. Thank
We
you.
now invite members of our press to ask questions. Any questions?
State's Attorney Foxx, thank you.
Of course.
As I'm listening, I can't help but think that and you tell me if I'm wrong, this, and I've not seen this before, if this is new, to have a printout like this. Is this a bit of perhaps a PR, public relations attempt to change the negative narrative that it has been directed at you? Maybe not fairly, but it definitely has. We can't hide from that. And that you talk about the philosophical debate. Are you losing that debate?
Well, first, this isn't the first time we've done a year-end report. We've had a couple years off, largely because of the pandemic. When I first came into office, we did an annual report of our data to be able to show folks what we are doing. I think the last report, I'm looking at Matthew, might have been 2018, 2019. So no, this isn't new, but thank you for appreciating it. And again, we want you all to be able to look and see what we're doing. As I said before, when I hired our first chief data officer, I wanted to be the most transparent office in the country. And the reason that I wanted that, you talk about the perception. Nothing frustrates me more as a lawyer than people not looking at the facts. Nothing frustrates. I couldn't have gotten through law school if I didn't look at the facts. And oftentimes what has been reported in media, someone said it's the state's attorney's fault that crime is up. And not an interrogation of, well, why would you say that? What data supports that? The reason we wanted to be transparent from the moment I got here is that for years, an elected official could come pound on a lectern and say, I've kept you safer. And then all we'd have to do was take their word. And if I'm being perfectly honest, I knew as a black woman doing this work that I would need to have receipts. I know, just like leaving Sam's Club, and you got to show the receipt, I got to show you what I'm doing. Not in the history of this office, and state's attorneys prior, have any of them been as transparent as this office has been. Every piece of felony case level data on an open data portal. And yet, someone could say something, and it would be reported for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks on end with no interrogation, with no fact checking. And so this isn't a PR stunt. It is what is owed to the people of Cook County to know how their elected officials are doing with the responsibility that they have been entrusted. And so I'm grateful to be back here at the Union League Club. I've been here in the past. I've done addresses at City Club, usually annually. This is what we do. And despite the noise that comes our way, we like to pull our receipts out of our pocket and show the hard work that is being done every single day outside of the headlines.
Go ahead. No, that's fine. No, go ahead.
Thanks for taking our questions.
Of course.
I know that you've spoken a lot about transparency, and one of the negative perceptions that you have gotten really started with the Jussie Smollett case. I know we're bringing it up again, but he will be sentenced next week. Is there anything else that you can explain to the public about that case and how it started in your office and what happened?
Yeah, what I'm going to do is respect that Mr. Smollett is going to be sentenced next week and respect his right as a defendant to have his day in court and assure you that I will have a lot more to say once that has happened. What I will say, while I have an audience, is that our office, as demonstrated by today, we prioritize violent crimes in our community. And while 2019, when that incident happened, we had 498 murders in the city of Chicago, we had a number of unsolved homicides involving Black women. In that year, in that week, we had young people coming to our court who had been victims of the sexual assaults that we talked about. My priority has always been on violent crime. Always been on violent crime. What I will also say is that the attorneys who worked on that case, two attorneys for whom I have a tremendous amount of respect, one of whom tried the murders of Commander Bauer, the other of whom tried additional murders of police officers. Their character, their commitment to public service has been unquestioned. And so I absolutely will have something to say when the time is right, because much less about me, but about the perception of the hardworking people in my office who operate at the highest levels of integrity and the respect for this process that has allowed me to have to sit back, I'll have a lot more to say after sentencing. Sorry, Sarah.
When you say you'll have something to say, is that a full explanation of why,
Sarah,
with all the evidence that was
Sarah,
in this case, that...
Let me say this, because I've said it. And I think what is dissatisfying is that it's dissatisfying. This office cannot make an offer for any disposition unless we believe that the person that we made the offer to committed a crime. What I can say, and I invite you, encourage you and the members here to look at our data and how we handle cases, nonviolent offenses. I will answer all of those questions. What I also want is if someone could ask me how we could get to 154 wrongful convictions by Sergeant Watts, to ask me how we've been able to operate and be called the wrongful conviction capital, false confession capital of the United States under the watch of a media. How did we get here? I'll be glad to sit down ad nauseum and ask and talk about what it is in these communities that have been impacted by actual violence, what they feel about the attention that has been given to this case and not the solving of homicides in their neighborhoods. You say the time and the place, we can talk about it. Because I will tell you that that's what is on the minds that are pressing folks right now. But I'll answer the questions about Smollett. My hope, through 3 years of an investigation that started with the preposition that perhaps that I had done something, and the summation was that I hadn't, that we put it to bed so that we can address violence in our communities, so that we can talk about the loss of life, so that we can talk about the things that matter to people who are finding shelter in their bathtubs tonight.
State's Attorney Foxx, your points are well taken about the data on violence in other places, charges that are approved by your office, but considering the level of violence that we've seen the last couple of years, what should your office be doing differently, or what does your office need to do better than what it's done?
Thank you for the good to see you in person, Patrick. I feel like I only hear your voice. Listen, I think we are always examining what we can do better. How do we engage earlier on cases? How do we ensure, I think one of the things that we are really proud of in our work with our police partners are building stronger cases so that we can get to conviction. But I want to again say that we respond to violence. Even again, when we interrogate, when people make statements about violence, we show up after an arrest has been made. That's real. What can we do to make sure that we're building strong cases? What can we do to make sure that people who are a threat to public safety aren't released? How do we make sure that our bond and our electronic monitoring practices are meeting the needs of our community? Those are things that we're evaluating. But the reality is, you're right, the violence that we have seen, though it is a national issue, we continue to outpace even our other major cities. And so we have always been willing to sit at the table, to work with our partners, to strengthen those relationships, to work with the community, to strengthen relationships. A lot of the things that we've been able to accomplish around this has been community members stepping up and working with us. But I want to make sure that as we talk about this, that we're assigning how the ecosystem works appropriately. That's the responsibility of those who get to tell the story. One of the things that we did with our data reports, the reason we start putting arrest on our data reports is because in the wake, for example, of the uprisings in 2020, and people were saying, well, wow, these people are looting because it's Kim Foxx's fault. Do you remember that? Y'all remember that? They said it was my fault. We know better. We know better. And so I had to explain to people how the process works. Someone commits a crime, they have to be arrested, and then they're brought to us for a review of charges. If someone is not arrested, we can't prosecute. And I would ask, literally beg the media to ask those questions. What's the clearance rates? What's the arrest rate? Of the arrests that come to us, what are we doing with them? Hence the repeating of our approval rate of 86%. And so we'll do whatever we can. We'll sit with every task force we can be on. We'll train every partner that we have because we believe it is a collective effort. And we will do whatever it takes to keep our community safe.
Do you mind, just one more?
Sure.
People are asking me to ask you this. They believe that you have lowered the penalties on retail theft and lowered the penalties for juvenile offenders. Are they wrong in believing that that has not happened? And if it has it proven beneficial?
Let's start with retail theft. Our office in 2016 made the decision to be in line with the rest of the United States and have a retail theft threshold of $1,000. What a lot of people forget, or actually don't forget, they don't know, Illinois has one of the lowest retail theft thresholds in the country. $300 is our retail theft threshold. And for retail theft, I'm talking shoplifting, not smash and grabs. We'll get there. Texas. I got a lot of problems with Texas. Texas's retail theft threshold is $2,000. It's $2,000. Wisconsin's is $2,000. Minnesota, Indiana, everywhere around us, 47 states have a higher threshold than we do. $1,000 puts us in line with places like California and New York, which, by the way, as Patrick mentioned earlier, we outpaced them in violent crime, but yes, we were sending more people to prison for low-level retail theft than they were because their threshold was so much higher. So yes, we changed our policy to be more in line with the rest of the United States and focus more of our attention on going after violent offenses. Now, even for those who were not charged with a felony for retail theft, they were still being tried and are still being tried for misdemeanors. So they're still being held accountable. And I think that gets lost in translation. As it relates to what we see as what we call smash and grabs, that is not a retail theft. It's a burglary. There's been no policy change. There's been no rules set. We treat them as the way that they should be treated, as felony burglaries. And we work with the Chicago Police Department and other our municipal partners to address those cases. There's been no policy change related to smash and grabs or organized retail theft. In fact, Cook County has our Cook County CC Rock Regional Organized Crime Task Force that has been in existence even before I came into office that deals specifically with organized retail theft and works with the business community to address that. They have been doing that under the stewardship of Dave Williams.